I've had a few clients that were referred by their therapist, and I was always curious about that. Like what is going on with the client that you might say, oh, mindful self-compassion might be a good thing for you to try. Like what would lead you to recommend that, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I would say those who, I often see it's really helpful for those who have been in therapy for a minute and maybe not seeing much budging because they're doing more of what I call the Band-Aid work, which is, I'm just slapping a Band-Aid on the wound, but I'm not really caring for attending to the wound, which often are those beliefs, and the inner critic and building up the, compassionate voice. Um, and those are typically like high achieving professionals, I would say. But really, it can be across the board. I tend to work with a lot of high achieving Black women and women. And so they're, high up in their career and say, okay, I've checked all of the boxes, but I still feel this negative belief about myself that's not budging. I have not been able to see it move or change in any way, shape, or form. And so I've even had some clients simultaneously through our work go through the workbook. And actually, I think it would be actually really helpful to be doing that in a social space with another person
Mhm.
or in a group. Um,
Yeah.
and so, like the work that you're describing, I think could be really valuable for a lot of people because,
Mhm.
a workbook, you're kind of left to your own devices. And sometimes, there's still a little bit of the eye roll experience when they come back. They're like, okay, I know I was supposed to do my homework, but I didn't do it this week. And so I think having some gentle accountability could be helpful too for those who might be more likely to avoid it.
And there's not a lot of group interaction. There are times when you do like dyads and breakout, but the one person is just like compassionately listening. It's not
Mhm.
like there's a conversation or, or you're making comments about what the person is saying. It really just is to have a witness. Like that's most of the stuff that you're in a group, you're doing the meditations, you could do them seated or lying down. But there was a power for me to be in a group. And I think even online, when you hear other people's stories or what they're going through or what is it whatever they're sharing that came up for them in the meditation, you see other people go, yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's something about realizing it's not just you. They call it common humanity. That's one of
Yeah.
the concepts of the course. It's just
Mhm.
kind of like even when I feel the worst about what's going on, there is a meditation practice to like imagine or believe or consider that this isn't just you who's going through this, that there are other people who have experienced this or who are going through it right now. And
Mhm.
something about that lessens the feeling of isolation if you
Yeah.
feel like you're a part of something bigger. And so I don't, never use the workbook. I said that already. It's just kind of like, I can't imagine doing this one-on-one or by yourself because I have always experienced it in a group setting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's helpful because like that coming humanity I know it's mentioned earlier on. It's been a while since I've like thumbed through it myself, all of the pages, but I know in the introduction kind of mentions all the tenets and the goals of why we're building this practice. But then you're kind of left to your own devices with the prompts for,
Awesome.
for much of it, unless, you are doing it in a therapeutic space. And most of the time it's kind of I don't know if supplemental work I would say, but it's building on top of the work that we were doing in session. And so may not always be time to go through the prompts so specifically when we're doing maybe other forms of processing, or things there too. So I could see how it could be helpful to do it in like in a space or with someone like you that has the training and is able to, it sounds like go through kind of a protocol or
Yeah.
steps and stages that help them progress and practice it in real time.
Yeah. 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 I do think that that is a good way to go. And you mentioned Black women. That was part of why I wanted to talk to you is that I'm trying to think of how to tactfully say this in a way that's going to be recorded, but there aren't a lot of women of color, or definitely not Black women, that definitely nobody when I did the course, when I was going through the training, there were people from different ethnic backgrounds, but not many. I can tell you how it impacted me and
Mhm.
how I think, like what you're saying, a woman of color who went to college got into my profession and realized I still didn't have enough skills to navigate what I was dealing with, or the skills that I was taught growing up in my small town. I'm from Delaware, weren't really serving me living in DC. Like I needed more
Right.
than what I came into it with, even though I was qualified for the job. The
Hmm.
people skills and the self-talk still needed some work. And
Hmm.
so, can you speak to, I kind of want to understand your perspective on why I was going to say women of color, but I'll keep the Black women might benefit from doing this kind of work.
Hmm. Yeah, I find that it's been really helpful for really any beliefs in the imposter syndrome territory, which I think heavily are like Black women are impacted by and experience, especially those who are high achieving and in these different workplaces where it's like, oh, okay, am I supposed to be here? Or, I am the boss, but I don't feel like I'm the boss because I'm dealing with these microaggressions here. And so, I find that it's been really resonating with a lot of them, just this idea of how can I develop a more compassionate voice, and find ways to view, okay, the inner critic's coming from a place of wanting to do well, wanting to, to achieve or meet certain goals. And what are some ways that I can have it show up in a slightly different way? And that's bringing in some of the internal family systems work also. And so
Mhm.
I find that a lot of them it resonates with them for those reasons because they, are constantly faced with, I'd say, evaluatory judgments, maybe in multiple areas. Or, I work with a lot of mothers too, so there's some around parenting and, or, parenting and career, and they're just kind of from all angles receiving these or having these negative beliefs. And so it's been really helpful for them to reframe some of those, to have a regular
Okay.
practice where they are giving themselves permission to be self-compassionate, because I think there's also a lot of stigma with it still, where there's an idea of like, oh, if I say something nice about myself, I'm cocky or I'm overly confident. And it's like, no, we're allowed to have a nice thing to say about ourselves, and we want to give ourselves permission to say and do and practice all of the things that coincide with self-compassion. And so I think it's been helpful for a lot of them to develop that tool and just give themselves permission to do that work.
I like that you keep saying compassionate voice. I'm gonna think about that. I've never used that term before, but I like the way it sounds for some reason. Because I keep saying mindful self-compassion, and people's like eyes kind of glaze over, but it is the compassionate voice
Hmm.
that has made the difference. And the concept I think I came in with that self-care was selfish.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
you're not supposed to be spending all that time on yourself. You're supposed to be doing for others and taking care of others. But the idea that like the airplane, put the mask on yourself before you try to help somebody else, that you can't give from an empty cup. And that this work to me was the self-soothing was a
Hmm.
way to fill up and then have something to give. But it takes time and it
Hmm.
takes time away to do this work. Have you encountered people who are resistant because of that feeling like that self-indulgent or, I shouldn't be spending time doing that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the way that I show up in sessions sometimes is with a little bit of humor. And so I'll joke around with clients and saying, we're talking a lot about this other person. I think that they should be paying the copay because we're not talking about you. We're not, focusing on you and the things that you are here to accomplish. We're more speaking about this other person, and not
Mm,
in a minimizing way, because that person may have perpetuated trauma, or they may have a difficult relationship with them. But oftentimes when I'm doing my intakes with people, they're there for themselves. They have a specific goal that they want to accomplish, that they want to accomplish regardless of how anyone else is treating them or acting, or any of the above. And so I think that there are some times where they can be a bit resistant to find the time to do, say,
mhm,
like the workbook, or
mhm,
to practice some of the self-homework around building up these the compassionate voice or the beliefs. Um, and I do think too that there's a lot of I guess resistance around trying to find the right words. So there's still a little bit of perfectionism in there of, okay, I've
mm,
identified the negative belief, but now I need to find the perfect compassionate voice or the perfect positive belief to replace this with. And, I
yeah.
do coach a lot on there is not a perfect one. It's one that resonates with you. And I use the term of something that carries, what I say is like good charge, or positive charge. So when you hear this out loud, you feel, you feel good in the body. You feel a sense of relief, or you feel sometimes even the butterfly feeling, a little bit of excitement. And I try to relate it to that. And so there's a little bit of incentive with doing it. But I have had some clients too who have been like, yeah, no, I'm not really interested in that work in that way. And I respect that, if that's their choice. I have, I think more often than not, I've had there be more willingness around it, more openness for it. And then I also share that there's maybe different ways of approaching it with different clients too. So sometimes I have clients that resonate more with the body first, because I think for some, at least with how I've practiced or approached it, it feels, or people experience it as more like a cognitive approach, versus somatic. And so I think incorporating the body has also helped with that receptiveness. But I have some, they're just like, okay, this feels like a math equation, and I'm just, replacing this with something else. And I'm like, no, it's not that, so I'm doing some psychoeducation as well. But I find that when we're doing the somatic work, which is kind of bottom up approach, we call them,
Mhm.
that people are tend to be more receptive because as we're building up that foundation, they're also building up the other resources to be more consistent with the workbook or be more consistent with their therapy homework.
I never thought about it until you said it, that someone who likes logic, who feels comfortable in logic, and who wants to understand it from that point of view, this is a lot of getting into your body and listening to your breathing. It is a lot coming out of the head and coming down. And I understand how that could be uncomfortable if that's not what you're used to or
Hmm.
what you want to do. And I hadn't thought about that. Something else you said. It'll come back to me. I should have wrote it down as I was thinking about it. But oh, like my heart kind of sank a little bit when you said perfectionism because I recently heard somebody talking about the doing twice as much for half as much.
Yeah.
Then it's just kind of like, oh, like that. I have to get it right. I have to choose the right word like that. I think beating up on ourselves or unrealistic expectation of
Hmm.
what it can be is just something that's mm, embedded. I don't know the word for it, but it's like it's definitely taught that
Yes.
you have to do twice as much just to be worthy of
Hmm.
being present. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the from what you're sharing too, and just what I've read from the mindful self-compassion, it does really sound like it relates to IFS, the internal family systems, and they
Mhm.
talk about legacy burdens being kind of these carried down intergenerational beliefs that a lot of Black women carry. And I always find perfectionism is somewhere in there. Yeah, twice as hard, half as far, is in there. I think there's also a like good enough cognitions or things in that realm, the valuatory judgments as well that I find a lot of those showing up. But these legacy burdens and Tamala Floyd, she's a great trainer in this space, and she often has retreats and she actually led the training that I did for IFS. But she speaks a lot about that legacy burden aspect. And so I find that there's definitely an overlap with the self-compassion work, the mindful self-compassion work, and the legacy burdens, because those are the ones that are harder to budge, I feel like. It might be easier for someone to say, oh, okay, I did a good job on this isolated project or this isolated presentation. But when we're going into those legacy burdens, those ones are a little bit deeper. And from that model, they would say they even started before some of us were even here. So
Yeah.
we're healing, intergenerationally in a lot of
Mhm.
ways.
I have a coach who I think I quoted very early on when I started my Instagram, and I might bring that quote back again. She talks about Black excellence, and there's
Mm,
just something about the way she said it. It like keeps you chasing
yes.
because you're never actually going to acquire it, but your belief is, but I have to keep
Hmm.
that has to continue to be the goal. And she,
Yeah.
over the times that we've been talking, she's like, just like, we need to learn how to unpack that and figure
Hmm.
out what that's actually about and what we're actually trying to do. But just her using, she said that word to me, Black excellence. It's like, yes, I did buy into that. And that's the, twice as hard for half as much. That's embedded in there. But it is the kind of clothes clean, hair done, house
Yeah.
clean, like nothing can be out of place
Yeah.
or you're failing kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's
And
definitely.
I like the term legacy burden. I've never heard that before.
Hmm. Yeah, she has some great talks on it. I think she has a few on YouTube too that I can share. But she does
Yeah.
retreats, and I feel like there could be, I mean, there's probably a good what do you call it, overlap of the two. And I'd be curious if they don't already exist, if they're that would be really beneficial to have some trainings that kind of combine the two. And
Yeah.
I think you mentioned too in terms of black faces in these modalities, because
Mhm.
I think it wasn't until recently when I was trained in EMDR and IFS that I even had a black trainer. Most of my
Oh.
trainers were white men and white women.
Mhm.
And so being able to attend, and actually I was able to attend BIPOC training. So everyone in the space was BIPOC, which was also really valuable, I think, too, because we were able to
Yeah.
speak to what kind of things do show up for our clients and for ourselves as we're also doing our work in the training. Um, but yeah, I think that there definitely need to be a lot more like BIPOC faces in these spaces because I don't think there are enough. And I wonder if that's part of the resistance. It's like, oh, well, that's not for me. Because they don't
Mhm.
see maybe the representation as often.
That's interesting. And most of the people that I get have are educated, have gone to college, have done some therapy. And so
Hmm.
then they're open to this. Like I've never gotten someone who hasn't done anything.
Hmm.
So I do wonder if there is some, I'm going to say desensitization that you are used to being the one and only. And so then to walk into this kind of environment isn't threatening or, isn't intimidating.
Hmm.
Um, but the IFS, I've only read a book, and for the life of me, like nothing is coming to me right now as I'm saying this to you, but that's the only thing that I know. I read one book about it too. And I do like the parts and how the parts talk to each other and how some are protected like that. I don't know a lot about it, but I am going to look at Tamala Floyd and see what she's offering and
Yeah, her
maybe
book
read
is
more.
great too. Her I use a lot of bibliotherapy, so part of the mindfulness of self-compassion workbook and listening when parts speak by Tamala Floyd. Those
Oh,
are two that
okay.
I tend to pull from as well, and it's kind of a way to do your own practice of some of the um identifying parts and kind of processing through. She speaks a little bit on the legacy burden aspects too.
Okay. I definitely will look into that.